Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
This is My Nerd World, and welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. This is a bonus podcast for the weekly Star Wars podcast that I've been doing now since, well, right around, I guess, 2013. I'm on episode number 125 of the Star Wars podcast show. So if this is your first time listening to any of my shows, I'll give you a bit of a background. I do want to provide a disclaimer before I go down this road. I was, for a number of different reasons, I was inspired after seeing Solo, and after deciding to go and look at some box office numbers of how Solo was doing. For those that don't know, it's, tracking of the box office is behind what it was for Rogue One. Currently, it's Sunday morning. I don't know what the Saturday numbers are, and I'm trying to get myself to the point where I don't care, which is part of the reason why I decided to put together a show and have it be a message to the Star Wars fans. Now, disclaimer, I'm not here to change opinions. I'm not here to call for anybody to change anything that they are doing in regards to their own personal Star Wars fandom. This is not a show where I'm going to sit back and say, stop putting up videos about all the things wrong with The Last Jedi. I'm not going to do that. This is not a show that's going to say, stop making comments on Twitter and Facebook. I'm not going to do that. This is my personal opinion, and what I hope happens, I hope I can provide some perspective on the fandom right now. For those that follow closely enough and listen to my show, or just, again, follow the fandom and go to YouTube or read comments on Twitter, it would look like the fandom of Star Wars is divided in ways that it's never been before. This is not political. I'm not going to make it political. I am going to use our national politics as an example of some clarity that I hope to provide, because I firmly believe that what we're seeing in the Star Wars fandom mirrors what we're seeing on the national stage. And this idea that as a country we're divided further and further, I don't believe that we are. What I know to be certain is that we have the ability to share our views and opinions, to seek out and find and consume other individuals' views and opinions in a way that we have never been able to do before. And I don't think as a society and in the Star Wars fandom, we have caught up to that. So if you disagree on any level with what I say on the show, that's totally cool. I respect that. I have no problem with it whatsoever. So I just wanted to put that out there of my intention. My intention is to just provide you with a theory and to provide you with some clarity. If you're a part of the fandom that's frustrated by comments that are made about particular movies and things that you love and you think there's too much negativity out there, then maybe, just maybe, this message to the fans will help you moving forward to understand exactly what I believe is actually happening. Now, some of my background, first as a Star Wars fan, I'm 45 years old. I live here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I was born and raised in Southern California, and some 40 years ago on Friday, I saw Star Wars A New Hope in the theater as a 5-year-old kid with my father in Rosemead, California, and I've been a fan ever since. I've been a diehard Star Wars fan ever since. I'm not an apologist, but I'm also very accepting of Star Wars, and I love all of Star Wars, even the prequels. For the problems that they have, I still sit down and enjoy watching them, and even sometimes just watching a movie like Attack of the Clones, and even parts that are slow and boring, I watched the film like I would go through a Star Wars, sort of dictionary, looking at the visuals of it or looking at an art book. That's just the kind of fan I am. I try to be positive. I sat down with my wife the other day. We've been married for 18 years. We were talking about Solo, and she goes, "Well, what didn't you like about Solo?" Because I really did love the movie, and there were some minor things that I didn't like about it, but I can say that about every single Star Wars film. So apart from being a Star Wars fan, I'm also a radio veteran. I got into radio back in 1996. From 96 until 2006, I did rock radio, alternative, active, classic rock stations. I started off doing alternative rock as a DJ, and then moved into morning and afternoon shows. So there's going to be a bit of a wonky edit right here because I kind of lost my train of thought because in the middle of doing my show, my 11-year-old had snuck into my bedroom slash office because he'd woken up and was standing in the middle of the corner of the room trying to get my attention, and I didn't see him. So now he's going to curl up and watch his dad do his podcast. Well, you know what, son? Maybe you can learn something as well. Okay, so started off in radio in 1996. From 96 to 2006, I was a DJ morning and afternoon shows, and then I transitioned into talk radio, and I've been doing talk radio ever since. I bounced around the country a bit. Again, now I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Okay, so I've done a similar rant to what I'm going to do on this particular show on the air as it relates to our national conversation when it comes to politics. But again, I'm not going to get into politics. What I want to dive into in this message to the fandom is hopefully, again, provide a little bit of perspective as to what is actually going on, in my opinion, in the fandom versus the perception of what's going on in the fandom. I don't believe that we as pop culture and specifically Star Wars fans are as suddenly divided as it looks like. I simply don't believe that's true. I believe that the audience for Star Wars has grown. There's more fans now than ever, right? It's like every year we hit peak, in my opinion, especially now with all the Star Wars movies coming out, because as those of us that are older that have been with these movies, since we were kids, we now have kids. And now we are not only passing on our fandom to our kids, but there are kids out there who didn't grow up with Star Wars, who didn't have families that brought them to Star Wars before we got new movies. Now we have new movies that is bringing more individuals into the fandom. And I believe that this growth is just going to be exponential throughout the years as Disney and Lucasfilm continues to go and create content. So arguably you have a larger fan base than what we've ever seen, and it's going to continue to grow, most likely, unless Star Wars completely falters in the coming years. So what's the biggest common denominator in the fandom? What's the biggest thing that's changed over the course of, say, the past 10 some odd years that's brought us to where we are now, where we feel like there's a ton of negativity and backlash whenever any Star Wars movie comes out? Because we see videos and we see tweets and we see posts. Well, I'm pointing to the internet in its most base level. That's what I'm talking about. If you look at the trajectory of social networking and Twitter, and you lay on top of that the release of Star Wars films, in my opinion, it is abundantly clear to see exactly what's happened. This is not a fandom that suddenly now is divided because Disney and Lucasfilm took over Star Wars. This is not a fandom that suddenly now is turning its back on Star Wars because they didn't like the decisions that were made in The Last Jedi, or this ridiculous, boycott Solo movement. This is a fandom that has the ability to go and give their opinion now in ways that you could not before during the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. And a fandom that is wanting to go and see and consume the opinions of others, because that is in our nature to want to do. We want to see, and we like to see, our views and opinions validated, right? But also challenged. And so I think in order to deal with what we see within the fandom, it's up to each individual fan to decide how they are going to consume the comments and the media that is laid out before them. And this brings me back to my comment over the box office, because Solo is tracking lower than they had anticipated. And I remember reading that after seeing the movie for the second time. I saw it on Thursday and Friday, and thinking to myself, wow, that's a real bummer. And I felt uneasy. And I had to do a gut check moment for myself and stop and go, why do I care? Why do I care how Solo does in the box office? I mean, sure, I care because I want to see this thing that I love be successful, but we don't know what Disney and their expectations are for this film. It's not like if Solo does worse than Rogue One or doesn't break Memorial Day box office weekends, we're suddenly going to stop getting Star Wars. Not to mention the fact that if we did stop getting Star Wars, so what? And what I mean by that is, as a fan that's grown up with these films, there was a long period of time between Revenge of the Sith and Disney's, or acquisition of Lucasfilm, that I thought we weren't going to be getting any more Star Wars movies. And now we've got 10. We have 10 Star Wars movies, and more that we know are in development, even if they were to stop the Star Wars machine after those ones are in development. And that brought me to, again, the inspiration to do this show. Now, so you know that I'm not talking out of my rear end, right? Okay. Let me present you with some numbers. And to me, this validates the theory that I'm attempting to lay out here. So when you go back to, you look at the tracking for, say, MySpace, right? For those of us that remember MySpace. MySpace really peaked right around 2007, and even then it paled in comparison to what Facebook and Twitter and YouTube would end up gaining in terms of popularity, okay? Facebook arrives globally right around 2006. Launched in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 2004, but arrives globally in 2006. By mid-2008, Facebook begins to take off, peaking and holding and growing up until recently with a lot of the controversies around it, with some of the data collecting practices of the apps that were on Facebook. But it peaked right around 2011, okay? As of right now, as it stands, YouTube and Facebook still account for 25% of all web trafficking, okay? Twitter starts in 2007, begins rising in January 2009. By December a year later, between December of 2009 and 2014, let me back up, I'm sorry. So by December of 2009, there's 80 million people on Twitter. So in January of 2009, it begins to rise, and by December of 2009, you have 80 million. By 2014, you have 284 million users on Twitter. By 2018, 327 million users on Twitter. And again, YouTube and Facebook accounting for a third of all web traffic. YouTube starts in 2005, takes off. In 2009, begins to rise, and then steadily continues its increase all the way up until 2013. And still continues to increase until this day. Okay, so you have a sort of commonality between, the rising of Facebook, the rising of Twitter, the rising of YouTube, and then you look at the Star Wars release dates and some of the pivotal events that have taken place in Star Wars acquisitions and releases. Revenge of the Sith comes out in 2005. Okay, now I don't know about you. I saw it in the theater. I don't remember a lot of swirling in the fandom of controversy. Most of those opinions were reserved for conversations with friends, conversations online, but they weren't conversations online that you would instantly see if you went and opened up an app. They were conversations online that you would have to go and seek out, right? Okay. They were conversations you had with your friends, you had, with people at work. These weren't conversations that when you opened up a particular program were right there in your face, okay? Clone Wars, the cartoon movie, right, that ended up being the Clone Wars TV show, that hits theaters in 2008, and then you had The Force Awakens in 2015. Are you starting to see the parallel here? Okay? The big difference is the internet was still in existence back in 2005 and in 2008. But by the time between 2008 and 2015, it wasn't just that you could go online and share your opinion. By the time you hit 2015, if you look at Facebook, if you look at Twitter, and if you look at YouTube, you couldn't go on those apps without seeing people's opinions about Star Wars. Before, you had to find it. Now, it's just there. Now we're at the point where Solo debuts in France, and I can set up, and I did, notifications for individuals that I follow on Twitter who I know are going to see the movie, so that I can get their instant reaction once the movie, within minutes of the movie being let out of the theater. Right? That's where we're at now. And even if I don't want to do that, all I have to do is open up my Twitter feed and go to my timeline, and the people that I follow, because I'm a fan, are more than likely in line to comment about the things that I like. And therefore, if it's not politics, it's going to be pop culture and Star Wars. And so it's almost unavoidable unless you don't follow those people. Same thing rings true for YouTube. The YouTube algorithms of the recently uploaded and the recommends that you have when you sign into YouTube, they're formulated to show you what YouTube thinks you want to see. If I open up my YouTube right now, I'm going to see a bunch of videos about Solo: A Star Wars Story that have titles that I have to really work at to look away. There's a definite pattern here. It's not suddenly like people's opinions have changed. It's not suddenly like people now just started to not like Star Wars. There are plenty of people out there who never liked Star Wars, but those conversations were usually, again, reserved between friends before the internet was there, back in the 80s and the early 90s. You get into the prequels, yeah, there were comments online, but I'm going to reiterate, you had to go and seek those out. Now it is in your face on a constant basis. And because of that, I don't think a majority of society has caught up with dealing with other individuals' views about the things that they go and they love. Does the box office really matter, right? I mean, I guess you start off here. Do opinions matter? Well, that's up to you to decide. Does the box office matter? Well, that's up for you to decide. You know, is it any different now in the fandom than it was during the Phantom Menace? I would argue no. I remember walking out of the Phantom Menace, seeing it in Tucson, Arizona, with a buddy of mine that I worked with, and I specifically remember walking through the parking lot and looking at each other and internally wanting to go, that was the greatest Star Wars movie I'd ever seen, but externally saying, oh, I really enjoyed that. Knowing that I had some personal problems with it. Knowing that it didn't quite meet the expectations of what I wanted for that movie. But I still walked out and we went, yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was good. And of course, over time, amongst friends, the complaints that people have about that movie, whether it's Jar Jar Binks or whether it's pacing, those things get talked about, with one another. But the box office was fine. The reviews were mixed. But again, you had to go find those reviews. The fandom all had different opinions back then, just as they do now. But they didn't have the ability to go and let everybody else know about those opinions. On top of that, especially when you look at YouTube, people stand to gain a lot of popularity, self-gratification, feed their own sort of pretentious nature, and money based off of the clicks that they get on their videos. And when it comes to stuff like Star Wars, especially with this alleged sort of perceived divided fandom, those negative videos out there get a lot of coverage. Now, we can get into the question of whether or not this affects box office. That's a tough one. I tend to believe that it doesn't affect box office. If I stick to my theory that this is a perceived division in the fandom that is specifically there because of the ability that people have to let their opinions be known, and how almost unavoidable it is for us as fans to see that opinion. I tend to believe, and The Last Jedi would be the example of that the division in the fandoms are the division in the fandom is the same as it's always been, right? And it doesn't have a huge effect on box office numbers. Now, I know people can push back against that when you look at Solo: A Star Wars Story, based off how it's gonna play out this weekend. But we could toss in so many other variables into Solo: A Star Wars Story that, to me, completely negates and strips away the argument that a divided fandom had any effect on it. 6 months, first time we've had a Star Wars movie being released 6 months within a previous Star Wars movie. You've got a movie at its core that was never really top of mind of the fandom for things that people wanted. So it wasn't like people were clamoring. I don't buy into this, nobody asked for a Solo movie. That's ridiculous. Nobody asked for any Star Wars movie. I mean, there's Star Wars movies that we want to see, but nobody asked for the original Star Wars movie. But there wasn't a fandom that was clamoring to see the backstory of Solo, even though it's really, really good. So you do have an iconic character, but he's being played by somebody different. On top of that, you have this, in my opinion, the weird sort of rollout. Right? If I'm gonna go and focus on anything that might have affected box office numbers, I think that Disney's promotion of the movie has been really wonky. I thought they were peaking really well about a month ago, when the longer trailers came out and some of the teasers came out, and it was really showing a different vibe and tone than what we'd seen originally. But then you had the premiere you had the screenings take place like 3 weeks ago. So we had the response from the screenings, which was overwhelmingly positive, and then you have the premiere 2 weeks before the movie comes out, and then you have this almost week and a half gap before the movie is actually released in theaters for everybody else to see. And so, I think you had a layer of hype and a wave of individuals that would have gone into the theater had the premiere landed a few days out before the movie debuted. And look, that is completely just me talking out of the place where I sit. I have no data to back that up. Those things, however, in my opinion, have a bigger impact on the box office numbers than this alleged perceived division in the fandom. Everyone can comment wherever and whenever they want in a way that's almost unavoidable for anybody else to see. And it's only going to get worse. And this is where I want to kind of get to the core of what I'm trying to say in this, right? It's only going to get worse. It's not like suddenly people are going to stop posting negative opinions about Star Wars. It's not like people on Twitter are suddenly going to stop posting their thoughts on Twitter. It's not like those things aren't going to get retweeted. Now, this is more to my point, though. The only way for any fan to deal with this division, doing that thing with my fingers, in the fandom, is to make a personal decision on how you are going to react to what you see. Right? The only way to stop, if you wanted to stop the negativity of Star Wars or the promotion of videos where they make ridiculous arguments against Star Wars, the arguments of social justice and Kathleen Kennedy ruining the movies and not my Solo and making it politically correct and all that. The only way to really do anything about that is to stop catering to it, stop commenting on it, stop watching the videos. Right? Stop promoting it in any way, shape, or form. And I also don't believe that's going to happen either. But you as a fan can make a personal choice on how you deal with it and handle it. And for me, the understanding that it's not the fandom that's changed, but it's the mechanism at which we can go and share our opinions and our comments about movies that has expanded and changed, provides me with a level of comfort moving forward that Star Wars will be here for as long as we fans want it to be and long after I'm dead. And that the individuals you see out there online that are talking negatively and irrationally in a lot of cases about that thing that you love so much, they are the minority. It doesn't look like it. Certainly doesn't look like it when you go to YouTube. But think about that for a moment. When you go to YouTube and you go to Twitter, even if you see a majority of negative comments, that's not representative of the majority of Star Wars fans. That's only representative of people that are on Twitter and people on Twitter that are talking negatively about the film. It's a lot easier, and people tend to, well, it depends on who you are, but people tend to go and you comment based off of emotion for the most part, right? You know, what inspires you to go and make a comment. And, you know, we can argue which one has which one is more powerful, positivity or negativity. But I tend to think that we'd see the positive comments and we go, oh, cool, especially if we're fans of Star Wars. But then we see the negative ones, and for those of us that get frustrated, those are the ones that we remember. You know, it's kind of like that breakup with the person that you're dating, where you end up only remembering the bad stuff, and you don't ever remember the good stuff. You know, you needed to break up. There's no doubt about that. But you only end up remembering the bad stuff. You don't end up remembering the good stuff. The same thing happens when we look at social networking and comments online and especially on YouTube. You go to YouTube and it would look like the majority of people out there hate The Last Jedi. That's just not true. You can disagree with me. That's cool, man. I don't care if you do, but the reality is it's not true, right? The reality is that the box office numbers don't say that's true. And the polls that you see for how unscientific as they are, they don't say that's true. And go to Celebration next year in Chicago and get everybody together in a room who are, you know, hardcore Star Wars fans and poll everybody. And I'm going to guarantee that the majority of people actually did go and like The Last Jedi. It was simply the perception that everybody hates The Last Jedi because a lot of people found out that they stood to gain a lot of clicks and a lot of subscribers and to have their tweets retweeted if they were to go and slam this movie. That's not to say their opinions aren't valid. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. But that is to say that they created a perception that, in my opinion, just didn't exist. Just like the perception that the fandom is divided more than it's ever been. I would like to believe that Disney and Lucasfilm are aware of this. I would like to believe that those in charge are fully aware that what they see online, what they see on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, is not representative of the Star Wars fandom. And the reason I believe they know that is because everybody working within Star Wars, within Disney and Lucasfilm, that's a big, big group of people. And so you mean to tell me that within those hundreds upon hundreds of individuals that are involved in creating this amazing content called Star Wars, you mean to tell me that those individuals don't have opinions and voices? And there's a big majority of individuals in there that hate what they're doing right now? I don't believe that for a second. That's why there's a story group. You know, art is subjective. It's not going to hit the right buttons for everybody, right? No movie is really going to do that. I think that Disney and Lucasfilm was doing a really, really good job of putting out good creative content. Look at the ridiculousness when it comes to, The Force Awakens and the people that complained that it was a rehash of the other original trilogy. We want something new, so we want you to take risks. So then they put out The Last Jedi, and The Last Jedi took risks and was different and new. And then look at what we ended up seeing in terms of the majority of online commentary and YouTube videos. There are not YouTube videos out there praising The Last Jedi. Those ones aren't getting clicks. There's YouTube videos out there talking about how not my Skywalker. What did they do to my beloved Luke Skywalker? Solo, a Star Wars story. Oh, it's just a cash grab and a movie that we didn't need. We don't need any movie for crying out loud. It's a fun film. And I do believe, by the way, just as a side note, I do believe the Solo is going to end up doing a lot better in the box office than what it's doing right now. I think it's got a slow start, but I really do feel that this movie has legs beyond what a lot of people are seeing right now in those box office returns. But for this fan, I'm going to stop paying attention to that because it doesn't matter. How Solo does at the box office has no effect on my personal enjoyment of that movie. I have to keep reminding myself that regardless of what the fandom thinks, it doesn't matter. I love my Star Wars. I watched Attack of the Clones the other day, and I love that movie. I have so much fun with that movie. I'm done ranking the films because I love all the movies in different ways, and some films are my favorite one day, and they're my fourth favorite another day. It's a shifting target. So as I wrap up this rambling message to the fandom, I guess what I'm trying to say is this. If I'm going to offer any suggestion, and again, I'm not asking for anybody to change putting their opinions out online. I'm not asking anybody to stop creating content and putting it up for other individuals to see. You got a right to that. You got a right to your opinion. You have your right to free speech, right? You go do what you want to do, okay? But to the individual, to you listening, I will say this. Don't let these ancillary things get in the way of your own love of Star Wars. Don't let box office numbers. And maybe I'll just speak for myself. I'm not going to let box office numbers get in the way of my love of Star Wars. I'm not going to let on-set turmoil and stories about directors getting fired get in the way of my love for Star Wars. I'm not going to let YouTube videos get in the way of my love for Star Wars. I'm not going to let other podcasts get in the way of my love for Star Wars. That's a real simple one. Unsubscribe, delete them, and don't listen to them. I'm not going to let Twitter comments get in the way of my love of Star Wars. You know, Russian trolls or not. Don't comment on them, mute them, block them. It's real easy. It takes a few seconds. The moment I started posting positivity about Solo, I started getting some negative tweets, and I go and look at those Twitter feeds. I'm like, okay, what's this person tweet about? And it's just tweet after tweet after tweet to individual after individual who had positive things to say with somebody who decided to troll all those accounts and tell them why they're all wrong. Okay, you're muted. I'm not going to let Twitter comments get in the way of my love for Star Wars. I'm not going to let Facebook trolls get in the way of my love for Star Wars. It's okay to mute people. It's okay to delete comments on your Twitter feed. It's your Twitter feed. You're not silencing anybody's free speech. It's your Twitter feed. Go into your YouTube, and when you see a video you don't like that's in your recommends or you're recently added, click the little link there that lets you go and say, I don't want to see this. So that the YouTube algorithm notices that they don't, that you don't want to see these types of videos posted to your feed. Don't pay attention to Rotten Tomato. Look, those numbers that I gave on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, they ring true for the popularity of Rotten Tomato. They coincides with it. You look at the popularity and the rise of relevancy of Rotten Tomato and the tomato meter, it mirrors the rise of YouTube and Twitter just exactly. So if you want to pay attention to Rotten Tomato, go for it. Utilize it as a tool. But don't let it affect your fandom just because Solo is sitting with an 80% critic rating but a 50% audience rating because a bunch of idiots decided to go and troll the Rotten Tomatoes tomato meter and skew the numbers. Look, we live in a world where by the end of this year, you can own 10 live-action Star Wars movies. You can have them in your house. You can have them available to stream on your computer. 10! And more on the way. By the end of next year, we'll have 11 Star Wars movies and more movies announced. Life's too short to get down or to be overly bothered by other people's agendas and wages of war against Star Wars. I really do hope that maybe, just maybe, even just one of you who listened to this particular show this helped in providing a little bit of clarity as to what, in my opinion, we're actually dealing with in the fandom. It's not a growing division in the fandom. It is a growing social networking, opinion, commentary-driven world that we almost can't escape from, that gives off the perception that the fandom is divided. It's not like suddenly people's opinions have changed throughout the years. The only thing that's changed is their ability to let you know what their opinions are. So thank you so much for checking out the show. Look, this was, as with all the shows that I do for my nerd world and my commentary and opinions about Star Wars, I do it for my love of Star Wars. I can't do it on my weekly radio show without getting fired. So podcasting, it's an amazing, way to create content, and it provides me the opportunity to put up shows like this and share my thoughts with the fandom. And now you can add this. Look, this is going to become, like I said, this is going to become just like all the other videos that people see out there, and this will go up on Twitter, and it'll be in individuals' Twitter feeds. I'm now also a part of this very thing that we talk about when we discuss divisions in the fandom. This will land on people's recently uploaded and their recommends, and people will decide whether or not they want to hear somebody espouse their view on why there is a perceived division in the fandom and why I believe the fandom really isn't any more divided than it was back when Return of the Jedi came out, right? This will all just be added to it. I'm just really appreciative that you took the time to go and listen, and I hope if you liked any bit of it, and even if you didn't, you go back and check out some of the other shows. I just completed episode number, again, 125 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast, giving my thoughts on Solo: A Star Wars Story, and there'll be a brand new show coming up next week. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter, @Jon, Jon Justice, or @TheMyNerdWorld. Also, leave a comment on the YouTube page as well. I'm on Facebook, Jon, Jon Justice. You can find me there too. And the show is located on YouTube, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, and your phone, I guess. So thanks again for checking out the show. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed Solo: A Star Wars Story. And I look forward to hearing from you very soon.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.